If you can't be critical about something you love, then you're not really engaging with it properly, especially media. Especially something that's 57, 58 years old now.
Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 93, recorded in January of 2024. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, ladies and gentlemen, where each episode we talk with a Star Trek fan, we analyze their fandom, and we try to figure out why Star Trek matters to us. I'm John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 93. If you wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us at feedback@trekprofiles.com, that's the email, or on Facebook or Twitter or Blue Sky, all at Trek Profiles. Spoiler warning, my humans. On this show, any episode of Star Trek may be discussed at any time. You have been warned. As always, my trusty sidekick and co-host is the dazzlingly delightful, dizzyingly diligent, yet never demure M5 Ultratronic unit. Say hello, M5.
M5 ready.
M5, let's see the news.
Announcements displayed.
Trek Profiles is an independent show. If you'd like to support us, the best way you can do that is just to follow us wherever you're getting your audio. We are on all the major platforms, and your following us helps other Trek fans find us. This show is 100% advertising free. We don't have a supporters program or anything like that, but if you'd like to show some appreciation, I'd ask for your donation to our official charity here on the show. That's the Children's Fund for Glycogen Storage Disease. There's a link at trekprofiles.com/donate to give directly to the charity if you would like to participate. Thank you for considering it. There are some lightly edited outtakes and bonus material at the end of this episode. They'll come after the ending audio cards. Enjoy that, or not, as you choose. At the end of every episode, my guest faces my Kobayashi Maru lightning round. They get 5 terrible multiple-choice Star Trek questions, and they have to give us their answer. After each episode drops, I tweet those questions out as polls where you can have your say. So let's take a look at the questions from episode 90 with Sharon Simon and see how it went. Which starship do you wish you had spent more time on before it was destroyed? The Intrepid, the Yamato, or the Saratoga? My guest said the Yamato, but the people online said no, the Intrepid by a 43% margin. Yamato was second at 29%, and the Saratoga was in third place at 28%. Which beverage should no longer be served at diplomatic functions? Blood wine, Romulan ale, Tranya, or Aldebaran whiskey? My guest said the Aldebaran whiskey, but Romulan ale was the answer online with 45%. Blood wine was number 2 with 23%. In third place was Aldebaran whiskey at 18%, and everybody wants the Tranya to be served with only 14% picking that one. Which non-Federation ship would be the most fun on a road trip? A Borg Cube, a Bajoran Lightship, or the Viserys. Now, my guest said the Borg Cube, but online people said no, it would be the Bajoran Lightship with 36%. The Borg Cube was in a tight second place finish with 35%, and the Viserys was in third at 29%. Okay, which of these is the most iconic Scotty line? I cannot change the laws of physics. No one has to tell an old Aberdeen pub crawler how to applaud. Laddie, don't you think you should rephrase that? And my bairns, my poor bairns. No, I am not doing the accent for you. My guest said, Laddie, don't you think you should rephrase that? But absolutely no one picked that in the online poll. The answer was 80% choosing I cannot change the laws of physics, with 20% choosing my bairns, my poor bairns. The other two options got 0. And finally, who was offered the best alternative life? Picard in the Inner Light, Kirk in Generations, Pike in the Cage, or Sisko in the Emissary? My guest said Kirk in Generations was the correct answer, but that was not the answer chosen by people in the online poll. No, in fact, it was a tie. Picard in the Inner Light and Pike in the Cage both got 32%. Kirk in Generations got 25%, and Sisko in the Emissary only got 11%. Now, if you enjoyed those questions, would like to take a stab at writing your own for possible inclusion in the show, send them to me, feedback@trekprofiles.com, or DM me on Twitter. That's it for announcements. Let's get to it. M5, roll it.
Commencing show transmission.
His favorite Federation characters are Bashir and Sisko. He also loves Koloth the Klingon and also the Bajorans. His favorite ship is the OG-1701. He's from London, England, which may or may not be part of Europe. Maybe he can weigh in on that. Earth in Sector 001. It's John Concagh. Welcome, John, and thank you for being on the podcast.
I am delighted to be here on a rather cold Friday evening in deep, darkest England.
Yes, as we record this, it is January, and there is a cold snap going on around the world. So I thank you for staying in and recording with me. But the M5 is a harsh taskmaster, and he demands that I ask question one, which is, John, are you a Star Trek fan?
I believe I am. Last time I checked.
And I understand from our emails back and forth that you are someone who came to Star Trek a little bit later in life. So tell me how this happened. I mean, obviously Star Trek's a pop culture phenomenon. You had to have been aware of it as a youngster.
Oh yeah, I mean, this is the later in life thing is a big asterisk because, of course, later in life for me is 14 more than anything. It's as a pop culture phenomenon. I was always aware of it tangentially. I think mostly because my father, one of the cassettes in our family car was The Ballad of Bilbo Baggins by Leonard Nimoy. So that,
oh my goodness,
technically was my first exposure to Star Trek. I don't think I started watching it properly till I was 14, 15. Back before Discovery, you could watch all of TNG. Actually, you couldn't watch all of TNG. They had like 4 seasons of TNG on Netflix. Seasons 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then sometimes they just did 5. But I watched TNG... and then I watched the original series through semi-illegal fashions, as you do when you're 15. You know how the internet works. And I got hooked then. And I kind of flowed this way and that way. I always, when Discovery came out, I watched it every year. I possibly bunked off my first day of school to watch Discovery's The Vulcan Hello, because that's what you do when you're 17.
Oh dear.
Yeah, I never admitted that, but I mean, what are they going to do now?
That'll go down on your permanent record card. Now this was all in the UK?
It's all in the UK, yeah. I mean, there was and still is this slight advantage to that because of all the licensing. You can watch almost all Star Trek on Netflix here, which is really great. But yeah, so I got hooked, and it was kind of off and on and off and on. It was always, John watches a lot of Star Trek. And then the lockdown kind of pushed it over to a full obsession for me because there was nothing else to do.
So let's talk about that before we jump into the pandemic. So you said you had watched most of TNG, the seasons that were available. You'd watched TOS. Yeah. Did you watch any of the rest of it at that time?
I think I started dipping into DS9 in about 2018, 2019, and bits of Enterprise. This is the thing, is I'm not a completionist. There are people, bless them, who can say they have watched every episode of every series. And I honestly can say I haven't. I've seen most of DS9. I know there's at least 3 episodes I've never seen the one with a leprechaun. I know I haven't. I know that every time it's come up on my Netflix, watch next, I've just pressed next episode. So if you want to do it on I Quit Star Trek and traumatize me, because Olivia's seen that episode and I haven't. So I know I've watched that. I think the only series I can say I've watched all of is actually the Discovery and the animated series. Oh, and Strange New Worlds. And unfortunately all of Picard.
I'm surprised you didn't say TOS, given your fanfic writing.
I have never watched The Deadly Years all the way through. I don't know why, but I've just never seen it all the way through.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah, I just clocked it once. I've never seen The Deadly Years all the way through, and I've never seen The Paradise Syndrome all the way through, but I think that's a good thing.
Paradise Syndrome, of course, is the one with the Native American sort of thing going on, and there's some problematic stuff in that episode, but, I get it if it's not your thing.
I just have know for the fact that I've not watched a lot of Star Trek. I've certainly not watched a lot of Voyager, but I don't think it's not really how I watch television. I watch what I want to watch, and I watch it a lot. Like, I could probably I could probably give you almost every line in the Galileo 7 or in Doomsday Machine off by heart, which is quite concerning. But
and also awesome.
Yeah, your mileage may vary, but I know that before 2020, I was definitely like, oh, I like watching Star Trek, and John likes watching Star Trek, but it wasn't like it wasn't as all-consuming as it is now. But there are reasons for why it's become all-consuming, good reasons, which I think we'll probably get to talk about.
Yeah, we'll get into that. So my question for you is, when you feel like, when you have an evening and it's, time to relax and you figure you're going to watch some Star Trek, I mean, are you just like putting on the old favorites, or it's obvious to me you're not a disciplined rewatcher, sort of going through whole seasons at a time.
No, I'm reminded of, I can't remember if it was Alex Perry or Tarantius who was watching them in alphabetical order.
Right.
On Twitter, which I still thought was terrifying and impressive at the same time. No, that's not. That's not what I mean. It is usually, go back to the old favourites, or, I've not seen this one in a while. I think the last episode I watched was the DS9 episode with the Bajoran poet who comes back and thinks he's the emissary.
Oh, right. Yep.
I want to say Ascension.
Yeah, Accession. That's the episode you're thinking
Accession, about. Yeah. It's funny, I'd say these days, I consume a lot more written Star Trek content. So books, fan fiction, fan content, articles about it than I do actual Star Trek. But I do still watch a lot of it. I try not to saturate myself with it too much.
You're basically just dipping in and watching. It sounds like you're just like watching whatever episode sort of strikes your fancy.
It's what I think the biggest change in how I watch Star Trek was doing I Quit Star Trek every week. Almost literally every week for 2.5 years.
And that's a slog.
That was a slog. And it was a slog made possible by Boris Johnson's eminent handling of the COVID crisis and a lot of lockdowns and some very, very patient and dedicated flatmates I live with in Edinburgh who had no issue with me interrupting various group dinners to record podcasts. But also me just coming and being like, I'm doing a Star Trek podcast, tell your friends, and then looking at me and going, John, what the hell? Please stop.
Yeah, I'm not telling anybody about this. In fact, I'm going to take an oath of silence about this whole thing.
But yeah, that changed it because it turned. Not only has I Quit to require me to think more about stuff, but I had to watch more of it. I just ended up watching things that episodes of Star Trek I'd have never intended to watch. It meant that I watched Voyager, and I went from having no very limited views on Janeway to having really liked the character and really having basically I went from Voyager isn't worth watching because it's not particularly interesting to Voyager isn't worth watching because they bungled a really good concept and a bunch of really good characters, which has made me angrier.
Yeah, we've talked about it on the show before, but I'll just offer this to you, which is my only critique, really, of Voyager, is that sometimes they don't take the premise of their own show completely seriously, and that's always bugged me.
Oh, they really... They take this premise of two crews forced to work together in this dangerous and resource-scarce part of the galaxy, and then by, episode 5, everybody gets on, and they have all the resources they need, and it's like, oh, God. Have them struggle a little. It's not like you have to have them become all miserable and actually torture is okay like Battlestar Galactica, but have them struggle a bit.
So my favorite compare and contrast, since you just mentioned Battlestar Galactica, is I like to always think about that episode. What is it, Bastille? It's like the third or fourth episode about the prison ship.
Yeah,
and the girl who later turned out to be in real life a member of a sex cult. Very strange story. Callie, the deckhand, she's captured by the prisoners, and they're like, "Don't you know about military stuff?" And she's like, "I joined for money for dental school." Right? You compare that against the Voyager episode.
That's such a great bit.
Yeah. You compare that to an episode like the 37s where they meet this wonderful human society, and they're like, "Oh, would anyone like to stay here? Anyone who wants to stay and opt out of this whole 70-year voyage back to the Alpha Quadrant, you're welcome to stay here. Just meet in this room and we'll beam you down to the planet." And nobody shows up. I'd be like, there've got to be 10 guys on that ship who are like, "F this, I'm gone." I don't want any of this.
Yeah, the thing is that they've got these moments like that where they fail to really earn. Yeah, it just frustrates me. Like, you could have had that if they'd struggled and tried, and Jamie's really like, maybe the crew will fall apart over this. But that basically they've all come to believe in her and the mission so much that they don't want to go and have earned it. But they didn't. They kind of had an easy ride.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there had to be somebody who was like, well, this is my last mission. I'm going to resign after this and, go be a gardener somewhere, or take up, painting or pastels or something and whoops.
Go to dental school.
Go to dental school, right? And that's not going to happen. So, okay. So let's sort of look at this chronologically. So the pandemic happens. You're at home. You're watching some Star Trek. You're not going out all that much. Talk to me along this journey did you suddenly decide you had to start podcasting about Star Trek?
So this all comes down to Olivia. And so Olivia's one of these people I just followed because it's like, you might like Olivia's content. Because Olivia was live tweeting her way through DS9. During the golden era of Trek Twitter, when men were men and women were women and small furry animals were small furry animals, and those are more interesting genders were more interesting than the rest of us. And she was tweeting just absolute... Well, anyone who knows Olivia, interacts with Olivia, knows that Olivia's comic timing is unbelievable. And she had just said somewhere, people like, you should do a Star Trek podcast. And I just went, well, I've got some experience making podcasting content, which I did, virtually none compared to what I have now. And then it just kind of happened.
So you did not, let me just ask a clarifying question. So you didn't know Olivia, you just followed her on Twitter.
I did not know Olivia at all. We ended up living surprisingly close to each other. I will not tell you where, but surprisingly close to each other, considering that we met each other just on the internet. But no, I didn't know her at all. I knew nothing. She was just a face on the internet. And then she was a face in a Zoom call. And now and 3 years later, I just had lunch with her today. Wild in many senses. But no, I didn't know her at all. But we just agreed to this format of I Quit Star Trek. And we recorded an episode. And then we recorded another episode. And then we kept doing that for 3 years. And I don't know how it happened. And I just met a lot of unbelievably incredible people on the way. It was like our first episode, we had John Billingsley on it because he just went, yeah, okay. I met Manu Sider, who wrote Trekonomics, and if you're listening, Manu, I hope you're well. I know you have abandoned the bird site for better things, but that was really cool. I met you, I met hundreds of people, and wild things have happened tangentially because I've gotten history work and talking work out of I Quit Star Trek, which was very weird and shouldn't have happened, but did.
So let's just spend a minute talking about the podcast itself. So what is the format of I Quit Star Trek? What is the podcast actually about?
So I Quit Star Trek is a podcast about bad Star Trek, which immediately felt like a dead end, but has turned out to be wild because if you take super fans of anything and put them in a room and go, what's wrong with this? They will go on for days. Because there's always something they don't like. There's something... If you love something, you also hate it. That's what I've discovered. If you really, really love something, you will find everything wrong with it. And you will keep finding everything wrong with it forever. And that's fascinating to me. But also, in all of the internet flame wars and how social media encourages arguments, it became a really great space to be like, well, we love this thing, but it isn't it sometimes? It's really bad. They put brownface up. They browned up Lincoln. Why did they brown up Lincoln? They didn't need to brown up Lincoln, but they did. And that's dumb, but I love Star Trek, and I don't pretend it's bad because it does these things, but it just became this show where guests would come on, they'd talk to us about how they fell in love with Star Trek, or and then when they fell out of love with Star Trek, and they talk through the episode, we end up sort of talking about people's relationship with it, what they like, what they don't like, how media disappoints them, why they keep watching it. I think one of my favourite episodes we did was with the British comedian Al Murray, who came on the podcast because I made a joke about him coming on Twitter. And I think the best conversation we had with that was talking about why media changes and why media can be bad.
Mm-hmm.
And just him going, well, he's been doing this stand-up character for 30 years, and he's just, I don't do it the same way I did it. Because media's got to change, and that's why sometimes you have bad TV, because it doesn't change. And it ages badly. And just Manu Saida, who just turns around and tells you, you know what? Maybe it just explains that the two basically blows the whole Tuvix debate wide open and goes, it's not really about Tuvix or Janeway. It's about the fact that you are unwilling to commit to a philosophical argument. The whole Tuvix debate is actually a sham dilemma because there are no consequences.
There are certainly consequences for Tuvix.
Yeah, but, you know, in the sense that Janeway does not have to live with her decision because the writers don't let her.
Right.
No one really questions her for it. You know, she just moves on. There's no repercussions.
And something of that...
It's a bad idea.
Yeah, I mean, something of that magnitude you would expect to have lingering effects and some knock-on effects in the show, and it didn't, and that's the critique, if I understand you correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Manu would phrase it better if I asked him. But I think that's something I'll always appreciate, is just how people bring their own perspectives and always bring their own experience and intellect to a topic to share with us, and how also it's really fun to talk about bad things in a way that you don't have to qualify them, be like, oh, well, you know, it's still Star Trek, it's still, you know, as fans, we've all kind of established this, what we like about this show. So being able to go, actually, you know, I don't like this bit. Is a nice, I think some people enjoy that healthy space. I certainly have been able to love Star Trek more talking about how bad it is.
You mentioned Tuvix, so give me an example of another episode that you had a change in your opinion on it as a result of doing the podcast.
Oh, God. Here we are, The Muse. The one where Jake Sisko gets, as the line from the podcast says, The Muse, or the one where Jake gets groomed.
Yes.
I liked that episode the first time I watched it. I went back and rewatched it, and I was like, oh, this is bad.
This is very bad.
Yeah. I mean, the other one that always gets me is when I was younger, I really liked the Omega Glory. And then we did it as our first episode. I was like, oh, actually, this is awful. This is really bad television. This is not, Gene Roddenberry submitted this for an Emmy. What?
I think there's some very strange episodes of Star Trek out there. And when you really put a critical eye to it, you know, you can definitely have a change of opinion on these things.
And I think you can and you should. And you shouldn't interpret having a change in opinions as having fallen out of love, that meaning that you liking it is bad. If you can't be critical about something you love, then you're not really engaging with it properly, especially media. Especially something that's 58 years old now. You've got to be rational about it, and you've got to appreciate what it's good at and what it's bad at. I mean, I know what I really want to do when we do, after the episode 100 is to start going through and doing some good episodes and be like, this is why we're here, because it can do this. And get some old guests back on to talk about episodes they really, really like. So,
oh, glorious.
If you're listening, yeah, we'll still be doing the ones, but, you know.
So what I want to understand now is how you got from, okay, I'm podcasting about Star Trek, to I'm now engaging on a preposterously large, wildly ambitious fanfic writing project. How did that happen?
Oh, God. Where do I start? It's difficult to know where to start with The Edge of Midnight. I think the concept of writing something like it had existed in a while. You know, I was aware of the existence of the technical manual, both the TNG one and the original Franz Josef one, and I read the books. And, well, for those who don't know, I am by trade a historian. So I was, you know, in lockdown surrounded by secondary historical literature and academic work and primary sources more than I was by anything else. And I think I know the exact place it started. And the exact place it started is on, well, like prose-wise, was on a bench when I went into the barber and he had a 4-person queue in front of me. I just whipped my phone out and went, right, I'm going to start this thing to pass the time. And what I thought would be a couple of thousand words became 20,000 word chapter, and then that 20,000 word chapter became a 100,000 word book, 120,000 word book, and the 120,000 word book is now a book and a half as part of a wider sphere of fan nonfiction, as the great Larry Nemeczek referred to it recently. Is that the moment it started? It's one of these things where I'm fairly sure that the origins of it come from three things. One, being surrounded by history. Two, trying to me imagining what a Strange New Worlds show would look like before they'd actually announced it.
Mm-hmm.
And three, of all things, me trying to write fan fiction and trying to well, how would this fan fiction ship I'm writing fit into a wider universe and the context? And my brain just going, right, well, I'll write something about it. And it just kept going. And I think one of the...
Okay, so let me see if I can just give you my impression of just what it is, and you tell me how close I am to the target. So what you've written as this project is basically an in-universe fictional history of the Federation Klingon War?
The Edge of Midnight is a history of the Federation Cold War written from the perspective of a 24th century historian. It's an attempt to weave together 55 plus years of Star Trek canon, fan and RPG guide content and personal ramblings into a coherent narrative that tells the story of events between Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek The Undiscovered Country.
So you are Federation Josephus, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's less Federation Josephus and more Federation Robert K. Massey, if you're familiar with your histories of the 20th century dreadnought races. Because I feel like my head was full of writing on this, because in the break between the first two lockdowns, in England, we didn't have a rolling lockdown. We had a really tight lockdown. Then they lifted it to try and boost the economy, and then they put it back in when everyone got ill again, because we're a sensible country. But in that break, I was staying up in Cumbria, in the Lake District, which is absolutely beautiful. We went for lots of walks. And on day 2 of 7, I fell down a hill and really badly twisted my ankle. It was fine.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
I didn't have to go. It was just I can't walk on this for 3 days, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So I sat and read all of, 2/3 of Robert K. Massey's Dreadnought in one sitting. It took me a year through the final set, but I read this book I've been meaning to read for 10 years. I read it in one sitting. There's 2/3 of it in one sitting. And Massey, if you ever are why did Britain and Germany go to war and why is it so much about ships? Massey will tell you everything from what's wrong with Kaiser Wilhelm, what's wrong with Bismarck, why is Edward VII such a weirdo, why is Jackie Fisher the maddest person to ever be in charge of anything? And it weaves this together.
Mm-hmm.
And I was I want to do something like that with Star Trek, because it's different. Because a lot of this fan non-fiction is tech manuals. It's your James fighting ships. It's your Starfleet. It's your RPG manuals. They're great, but what they aren't is narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And a good history is a good story. Not to sound like an undergraduate lecturer, but.
So, okay, we've had some Star Trek canon discussions here on the show before, and so let me just offer a provocation for you to react to, John. And this is my actual point of view, but you can feel free to challenge it if you like, which is that whenever it comes to what is the actual truth of anything in Star Trek canon, I think that it's a fool's errand. Star Trek canon doesn't exist. It's something that the people who write the show don't necessarily care that much about. And if they
they don't give a flying about it.
Okay,
and that is people. There are a lot of people who will be mad about this, and they, even people I work with and write with, and people who love Edge of Midnight, which is that canon is a tool, and if it's not the tool you need, you get another one. You've got. I mean, the most important Star Trek canon is a tool, and Star Trek interpretive canon is a tool and a waste of time. Is everything kind of? There's a heavy implication all the way, basically, until Undiscovered Country. And the Klingon Succession Crisis in TNG, that is the Klingon Emperor. Even Ron Moore's show notes talk about the Klingon Emperor, but it's never, the Emperor's never mentioned, so they just cut it out. The Chancellor is a medic. Or, the show notes for the original series say that there's only 12 Constitution class starships, and that Starfleet's tiny, but that we don't believe that anymore. Canon matters if it's helping you tell a good story. if it's helping you connect the dots, and it's helping your storyline have impact. You know, I'm trying to think, the best use of canon in Star Trek to tell a story is probably Undiscovered Country. Because we know the arc of Klingon history backwards. We know from Undiscovery back to TOS. And we know in the future they're going to be allies. And Undiscovered Country tells you about that point in the middle where they go from enemies to allies, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it does so by altering other things, by ignoring early TNG's idea that the Klingons are part of the Federation, by ignoring ideas that the Klingons of how the Klingons may have lost. Or even things like, Journey to Babel overwrites canon completely, in the sense that earlier in season 1, it's implied that the Vulcans were conquered. And then in the pilot, we're told that one of Spock's ancestors was human. And then we meet his mother. And then we find that the Vulcans are partners. You overwrite canon when you can tell a better story. And you should. I think acting like it's not a Bible. And it's fiction, for Christ's sake. You're not going to kill anyone if you change canon.
Okay, so I understand your point of view. So then let me ask you about the challenge of actually trying to write Edge of Midnight, because here you're having a project where you're trying to synthesize a lot of pre-existing things. So how in the world are you adjudicating what to keep and what to throw away? Because you have to have done some of that in trying to write this book.
It helps to think about what the trends are going to be. And this is where you're not just thinking like a historian, you're thinking like a writer. That what is the character arc, so to speak, of the Federation, the Klingon Empire? So, I made a specific choice to characterize my Klingon Empire as going from very feudal to very Soviet, because I wanted that allegory. And there are some people who like the feudalism allegory, and I don't hate the feudalism. For those who've read Edge of Midnight, you'll see that I engage with the feudalism question and the Klingon aristocracy. But there is a trend towards a more bureaucratic, more military, more authoritarian system than, the idea of the Klingons as a shogunate, which is a good idea. I think it's a great interpretation, but it's not the one I use. But that means that because I have this arc of where I want to go, I know what to ignore. If I hit something I don't like, I just kind of don't use it. It's strange. I had this headache to Strange New Worlds, because Strange New Worlds went for this big Gorn arc. As the Gorn as the villains over the Klingons. And you met me and chatted to me at Star Trek Vegas last year, and you know how I feel about that. But I never did.
Well, my listeners really, don't.
My listeners don't. Yeah. For the record, I think they've gone really badly in the direction of the Gorn. I think they had a really great opportunity to allegorize the Gorn as a metaphor for the encroachment on indigenous peoples. The Plains Wars, the air quote scramble for Africa, moments when Europeans pushed into what they thought was empty but had people in it. And going for the alien, xenomorph, rabid, murderous baby, lizard baby stuff was like, it felt... Not only do I think it's not particularly interesting, I think it's a great disservice to the potential of the Gorn. But I don't say it doesn't happen in Edge of Midnight. I just kind of curse. I can do what all historians do. It's go, I'm not going to talk about that. I can make references in the footnotes to First Fleet's constitutions being tied up in Gorn skirmishes, and that Enterprise was out of action during this period after the attack. I can things I don't like, I work in, because sometimes that's the challenge. I did not like Under the Cloak of War, which is very controversial. But I found a way to make, for those who haven't seen it and don't mind being spoiled, if you do mind being spoiled, fast forward like 3 minutes, I don't know.
This show is spoiled for all of Star Trek, so you can talk about any episode you want.
The Klingon ambassador, it's like this question of why would the Federation hire a Klingon ambassador with a strong case for war crimes against him? And I think it's a bad. I wouldn't have written that plot. I thought the way they handled it was bad. I thought having the conclusion being maybe murder is okay is not good. But I wrote a piece on the Edge of Midnight website, which is essentially, and it's just, for lack of a better way to analogize, it's a Nixon tape. It's the tapes from the president's office when they find out that Dacre has been killed, and it's basically the president figuring out that the head of the diplomatic corps hired this person without telling anyone, knew exactly who they were, and then that person then became so indispensable that they couldn't find a way to sack them. And that there are political consequences of that. It undermines the government, the person doesn't get sacked, and it collapses. It has, what they describe, the failure of negotiations, has consequences for the rest of the narrative. I don't like it, but I work with it. I think the only ideas I kind of reject are the ideas that there isn't an arc towards another war. Mainly because, narratively, I built the whole thing around there being a curve back towards war in Errand of Mercy. And if I include anything that rejects that, it kind of screws with what I want to write. It's more, what I don't include is just deeply, deeply practical.
Okay, I understand. So I want to return to where you're at with your Star Trek viewing. So as we sit here today in early 2024, best guess, what percentage of all pre-existing Star Trek TV/movies do you think you've seen? 60%? 75%?
I'm going to go with somewhere between 60 and 70. Maybe 66%.
Okay, and mostly missing, what, Voyager and Enterprise?
Mostly missing Voyager and Enterprise. Yeah, I know for a fact, weirdly, I have seen every episode of New Trek. Simply
so all the
because
modern streaming stuff.
All the modern Trek. I think I've just seen every single episode of it. I reviewed Stranger Worlds for Trek Core. Massive shout out to all the the editors and staff at Trek Core. I did the Stranger New Worlds reviews. So I did a lot of the group watching on all the other shows for that, which was great when Picard came out, and I think we all nearly killed each other. But yeah, here's the thing: is 60-70% I'm kind of happy with, because it means there's something new to watch sometimes. Having not completed Voyager means that one day I can watch something of Voyager I haven't seen. Might not like it, but it's new.
I'm right there with you, John. I will tell you, I didn't watch All Good Things only until about maybe 5 years ago. I just never watched it, and I just kind of kept it on the shelf. And I figured, hey, here's a TNG episode I've never seen, so I could just pop it in and, and eventually I decided I just had to do it. And so I went and I finally watched it. So I understand that. I understand that urge. So I understand that STLV was your first big Star Trek convention. Is that true? Or am I mistaken?
I've done the Destination Star Trek in London, but the thing about Destination Star Trek, for those who don't know, the European and London and British conventions, because they were technically different companies, were run by an overarching company which was professionally badly run. But not in a creation entertainment, a collection of chickens can organise this better. In this is a massive tax dodger, you have no intention of producing content after this kind of way. But Destination Star Trek was my first convention. It was November 21.
And this wasn't the one in Birmingham?
No, this is the one in London, before the one in Birmingham. Because the company did this one, and then it went under in 2022 and pretended that nothing bad had happened. It was very exciting to me. It was the first time. That was the first time I met Liv. It was the first time I'd done a Star Trek thing with Olivia. First time we were both recognised together. First time I met a lot of other people like Don Paris and others. It was a nice experience. STLV was a whole other circus.
Say more about that.
Well, for a start, at Destination Star Trek, I don't regard myself as a big content creator, but I wasn't definitely smaller than I am now. Edge of Midnight then was basically read by 12 people. Good for them. Now I don't know how many people regularly read it, but I know that I know it's being read by, I know for a fact that Edge of Midnight's now being read by at least 3 people who work in Congress, which is frightening, and at least 1 parliamentary staffer.
I'm surprised any members of Congress can read.
Well, it's their staff. They do the reading for them.
Oh, okay.
Who knows? Maybe they listen to Stephen Van Doren do the audiobook. But
quite right.
Going to STLV was different for 3 reasons. One, I was going with the Tranquility Press people, who I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. Side note, you should have Andy on as a guest. He is one of the kindest, smartest people I know. I really hope you can arrange that at some point. And Hi as well. Well, all of us. But anyway, back on the point. I was doing... The STLV was different because that was part of the Tranquility Press group. But also, first time... I think it's generally the first time I've ever done a solo trip internationally. I've done a lot in Europe, but the first time I just went, I'm going to go internationally and do a trip. But also in the sense that I met a lot of people who I had spoken to online for years. People, Suzanne, Mo, Kai, Jesse Earl, you, Rob Ray. I mean, the list can literally go on forever. And I think it was also the more frightening experience. I should also say hello to Bill, Bill is fantastic. It's like the New Jersey uncle I never knew I needed. But it was more the experience of walking around and being recognised, which was genuinely terrifying. And also that being in a place, it sounds like a joke, but it is true that Americans, you're a lovely people, you do come and talk to everyone. And that's fantastic, Which is frightening for me as a British-born person where we literally will die if we talk too much. I think there must be a rule about it in the Constitution. But
John, I'm going to say, respectfully, that you don't seem to suffer from this problem.
Oh, the trick is I'm half Canadian.
I see. Okay, yeah. Very good.
But but yeah, that was the thing. It was really fascinating and terrifying to be in a place where people knew the content I made. Both I Quit Star Trek and Edge of Midnight were interested in talking about it, interested in engaging with it. I think the sweetest moment was being at this stand and someone coming over and going, "Are you John?" It's like I was like your third subscriber to I Quit Star Trek. I'm just like, holy, that's insane. I'm so glad I got to meet you. Or, Jesse Earl, big content creators, like, you do great stuff. You are tangentially friends with people I know. I'm too English to ever bother you. And then just like Jesse being like, "Oh, yeah, no, I've been meaning to talk to you all weekend, but I wasn't sure how to approach it because your stuff is really cool. I didn't know how to talk to you." It's like, okay, what the fine. And that was really nice. Or, meeting you, meeting Lion Emmett, meeting Thomas Marone as well, who'd been a great contributor to stuff I'd done and shared a lot of ideas with each other. And, I'm very excited for some of his upcoming projects that I probably can't talk about, so I won't. But I think it was such an exciting experience to be, but also meeting new people and being in this place where everyone is obsessed with this crazy thing. So I definitely want to do that again. Touch wood, that's what that was. But it was one of my real highlights of last year. You can't see it because of the camera, but I've got a pinboard up here and it's still covered in memorabilia from SDLV. It's got Andy's hood decommissioning pamphlet. I've got pin for the Roddenberrys. I have one of our I Like Zeiss campaign pins. I don't know if we gave you one of those.
I believe I have one, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and then, there's a picture of us with our stand as well. It was a really utterly enjoyable experience. I'm barring a couple of nutters, which even they were just like, wow, you don't get outside a lot more than quite rude. Everyone was unbelievably pleasant. And it was a really enjoyable experience, and I encourage anyone who's ever thought about going to go.
All right, so tell me a little bit about what Tranquility Press is and how they tie into Edge of Midnight.
So, Tranquility Press, for the record, for the Paramount lawyers who may not be listening, we are not an actual publishing house. We have had this conversation with them. But it's a curated WebRing support site and writers group for writers of fan non-fiction, which is a term I'm once again borrowing from Larry Nemeczek and will continue to use because in the spirit of the great Nemeczek in the sky, it's a good phrase. More people should use it. And what the idea... the origin of Tranquility Press is dual, which is one, number one, me doing the formal fancy PDF of The Edge of Midnight, and two, the creation of the We Have a Gator Borg, The Oral History Battle 359, which I also recommend all the listeners have a look at, which is, when we did the formal PDF, Thomas Barone mocked me up a cover, like so, and he also added a little publishing house, Mark, as a little in-joke called Tranquility Press. And it just lived there. And then when Andy's like, I want to do a full PDF of We Have Engaged Borg, I put him in contact with Chaim Adikian, who did the pre-press, and made this PDF and book look beautiful. And also does their own world-building project called Through the Eye of the Needle, which is an exploration of the former Borg XB community that we see in Picard Season 1.
Mm-hmm.
Links presumably in the show notes. It's not my show, but I will provide John with all the links to all this stuff. And we were like, what are we going to call ourselves together? So it became Tranquility Press. And it's sort of not just a name to collect these works of, but because it's us and X3 and the work of Eric, who is a serving US Army officer who does his own Trek world-building stuff and has strong views on Klingons I disagree with, and if I talk more about them, he'll run me over with a tank, so we're going to move on. But the way I imagine it is we write these fan non-fiction works, but we also want to support people who write their own, because once we started talking about Edge of Midnight, once we started talking about 359, especially once we released 359, everyone's like, I want to write this thing. I want to do something on the Romulan War. I want to do something on the Trill. I want to do something talking about the Bajorans. And we just went, okay, write it. Mm-hmm. We'll help you. We know artists. We know print press people. We can point you to resources. That's the way I really want it to exist in the future. We don't make money from this, and we don't want to curate that much. But if you write something and I like it to be under the Tranquility Press banner, we'll do it. At the very least, we know the artists we like to use. We can send you to them. We can tell you how to interact with an artist, how to pay. I mean, the basic tip to working with any commissioned artist is collect a file of references and send it to them and just watch what happens, because every artist I have worked with on Edge of Midnight and other things has been incredible. A shout out to Paloma, who does the majority of the Edge of Midnight art. The last piece they did for me was a beautiful landscape of the Palais de Concorde, which I think is the first art of it based on that isn't that DS9 image we see. So I'm very pleased with that. But that's how I imagine Tranquility Press, and going forward is this place where this basic fan fiction. If you don't want to write there's Kirk's book / fiction is the backbone of the Trekkie economy. Like,
absolutely.
They're like small businesses and trade unions. If you get rid of them, the whole thing falls apart. So, but I think I wasn't quite sure how to class Edge of Midnight when I started it, but now it sort of fits it alongside these other works, and hopefully we'll have more and more coming from more and more authors. Massive shout out to Nathan Goldwag, who, beyond writing a fantastic article once called The Tarkin Doctrine, which is an academic exploration of why the destruction of Alderaan is more important than the destruction of the Death Star in the path of galactic history, which, if you're a Star Wars fan, read it, it's great. Has been writing stuff like this since before I started writing Edge of Midnight. And it's all brilliant. He just wrote an article about the economic warfare the Ferengi wage against the Dominion. It has tables. If you go and if you are a historian of the Second World War and you like Star Trek, it's incredible. He has a table of Dominion shipping losses in gross tons.
That's fantastic.
Well, gross megatons, I think. But and military expenditure in gold press latinum. It's incredible. It's got footnotes.
Footnotes, charts, and tables. Everything a nerd needs.
Yeah, and that's what we want to support. I want people to know that, is this like fan fiction? It's like this fan fiction. We're here. And we can help you make it look pretty and nice and, basically. And I'm really glad we created this space. I'm really glad, the number of people, Edge of Midnight has not had the whirlwind success of 359, and that's fine. 359 is a tome. It is 400-something thousand words of pure gold from Andy and Eric. And people are really connected with it, and I really hope that people continue to connect with it. Edge of Midnight is a sort of, if 359 is your racehorse. Edge of Midnight feels a bit like your proper workman's mule in that it's not as flashy, it's not as big, but it's going to keep going. Because I know I'll get, at every stage I will get to here and figure it out. So I know I will keep writing till I get to Organia.
Very good.
And I suspect once I've done Organia, and I've done it pretty, I will keep going until I get to Kittimer. Or I might, if by the time I get to Organia, my life has moved on till I'm too busy, I might stop there. But if I've written something that goes from... If I've written this and it gets to Organia, I will be happy with it. But I'll probably keep going. I know what I want to keep doing.
Very good.
And in the meantime, if Paramount would like to pay me to write something, they know where to find me. And I'd really like them to find me because I have a lot of ideas that I have not spoken about in public or on record. Because at some point, I'd like to do them for money.
Very good. Very good. Well, we will have links up to all of that up on the show notes page up at trekprofiles.com, and I would encourage people to check that out. Now, John, you made a reference to the fact that we're on a video chat here. Now, the video chat doesn't go out to anybody. This is just for you and I when we're recording. But you were saying how you were looking at this pinup board where you have all this memorabilia. So is that the sum total of your Star Trek collection, or do you have any other bits and bobs that you want to talk about as far as things you've collected?
I mean, I'm never really a big collector of things, mainly because I was a teenager and then as a student, reasonably itinerant. And people just kind of gave me a lot of it. I think most of this collection actually is really new. But I have acquired this year three things I really wanted, which is an original copy of the Tech Manual, the Franz Josef one, original copy of the TNG Tech Manual, and one of the books that really inspired a lot of Edge of Midnight, which is Star Trek New Worlds, New Civilizations, which, for those who never read it, is a travelogue of the Alpha and Beta Quadrant set just after the end of the Dominion War. And it's by Michael Jan Friedman, and it's fantastic. And if you're ever thinking, what is Tranquility Press about? It's making stuff like this. But, no, it's not a big collection. I've got a couple of costumes. I've had a really nice red shirt for years, and
TOS red shirt?
TOS red shirt, yeah, with a proper shoulder zip and everything as it should. But no, I'm not a proper collector. I know people who are proper collectors. Andy has his full 9-yard collection of Eagle Moth starships. I have one big Constitution class model, which usually sits on top of my computer tower when my computer tower isn't underneath my desk, but currently, because of space issues, it is. My biggest Star Trek collection at the moment, I think, is weirdly a collection of knockoff and 3D printed Starship models I use to wargame with.
Nice.
It's not Starfleet battles because I like finishing a game and I don't like using spreadsheets to play war games.
Okay.
I'm not an accountant. So I wrote my own set of rules, which is good fun. And at some point I will try and figure out a way to run in Vegas. But that's what in terms of per items, my largest collection, simply because I have friends with 3D printers who don't know how to say no.
So I would recommend, John, see if you can go and find the old FASA Starship combat game, the rules set for that. And he's going. He's got it. He's got the box. He's going to get it. There
I won this at the Wargaming Club bingo. Raffle.
John, I will tell you, I played that when I was in high school, and we had the little models, and we had the whole thing.
I believe this is a first edition as well. Yeah. So it's got the big... weirdly, it has lived up on top of there since before I went to Vegas. And I've just simply never had the chance to dig it out and figure out how to play it.
It is... it's a lot of fun, and I think you'd enjoy it. So go check it out. Does it have the little hexagonal little starships in there?
It has, it's got the little cardboard hexes.
Yep.
It's got the sheet. Somebody somewhere must have clean master controller space sheets. It is an absolute crying shame that the FASA licenses have kind of disappeared into the legal ether. because, there's a lot of how FASA handles things that people wouldn't agree with now, especially in terms of FASA imagines, for lack of a better word, a more capitalist federation that is generally considered canon. But it's definitely much more interested in imagining how all of these galactic powers interact with each other.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I loved their role-playing game. I have all the manuals for that. I have all that stuff. It's sitting like 20 yards right away from me right now.
One of my favorite bits in all those is, I'm looking at it now because I'm writing a little sub-article on what the Romulans are up to between Enterprise and TNG, and TOS, just an overview. And it's basically that all the little articles in the FASA books disagree with each other. Like, you've got an article from a Starfleet intelligence officer saying the Romulans are deceitful, violent, martial savages. And then you have Spock going, no, they're not. Are you mental?
Yeah, right on.
And
so, yeah, I get it.
And I think making people understand that a biased source is an interesting thing is complicated. I mean, I once got asked about Edge of Midnight, why is Seamus Devish so mad about the Klingons and isn't this just their way of life? And I'm like, I'm sure you can argue that, but Seamus Devish is writing in the 2330s in a perspective where the Klingons made a gamble for this violent authoritarian military regime and lost, and the Federation democratic system won. So he's going to have his own biases, and they're in the text. They're not as clear to us as they would be if you lived in the 24th century, but they're there, and I think that's a fun thing to add. But back on the topic, I love the FASA guides. I think more people should look at them, see how they've influenced thinking since then. I mean, between the FASA guides and the final reflection, there's just so much content that you wouldn't think ends up on screen that just has, because it's just that good.
Well, I think we should actually start doing that then, John. So it's time to talk about some episodes, books, and comics. Are you ready?
I am.
So you made a reference to The Final Reflection. This, of course, is the novel by John M. Ford and came out in 1984. And at the time, just to set the context, the only thing we knew about the Klingons back in 1984 was the 3 original series episodes that they were in, a couple of little bits in TAS, if you want to count that or not, and what we'd seen of them in the opening to motion picture. And that was about it. Now, it came out the same year as Star Trek 3, but of course, I don't think they were written. They were in production probably simultaneously, so I don't know how much influence there was on each other. So it was really written in a vacuum compared to what we know about the Klingons today. And it really is an in-universe history of the contact between the Federation and the Klingons way before the era of TOS. So let me just say that that's what it is. If you people haven't read it, it's fantastic. I'd highly recommend it. But what I want to know from you, John, is what about this book particularly struck you?
What struck me is that John Ford wrote a book that would have been really good even if he had no contact with Star Trek at all. If it was a completely original science fiction narrative, it would still be a really fascinating, gripping novel.
Completely agree.
Because it is wrote, if you read your Hornblower, your Boy's Own, it's very wrote by numbers there, but he's made it a wrote by numbers book from a completely different culture. It feels alien. The book does not shy away from making the Klingons feel alien, making Klingon norms feel alien. Everything from Kren talking about how he's old, how his age, he's old because he's nearly 9, or the Vulcans as sort of tutor eunuchs, or the brutality of the life, but also that it feels hollow. World building is a backdrop,
right,
in theatre, and it can either be a backdrop that is painted on the night before the show, or it could be the sort of backdrop that stylistically really makes you feel like you're in a place. And Final Reflection is dedicated to that sort of I'm going to make you think about what that galaxy was like 40 years before the original series. I'm going to make you think about why why does Journey to Babel matter? Why does contact with the Klingons matter? Why are the Klingons so afraid of the Federation? Why do they respect it anyway? I didn't read it till I started writing Edge of Midnight.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did. It completely changed my perspective on how to handle the Klingons and how to treat them and how to work backwards, in the sense that you can't work backwards in a straight line. You have to write, if you're writing prequels and understanding prequels, you need to make sure that they present what we know as certain as uncertain. Because nothing in history is granted. No one at the time knows what's going to happen tomorrow. And the final reflection is such a great way to do that in the Star Trek universe. I don't think it's been matched.
No, I'd say for a Star Trek novel, especially of the era, it is fantastic. It is so much better than it has any right to be.
Oh, I've got books appear like Sanctuary, Renegade, similar age books, the original series, Bantam books, and I think they're quite crap, In a better world, I make a lot of good money writing those kind of books, but that's not how the world works right now. But you're right, so I think the final reflection has soared above it in a way. It's only really been matched by The Higher Frontier, which is a book that connects the Aenar, the New Humans, and the Medusans together in this sort of very long, brilliant narrative about, like, espers and telepathic communities in Star Trek that's just really clever. And it also bridges the gap between the original series, between the motion picture and Wrath of Khan quite well.
So whenever the final reflection comes up, I always want to ask, if you read the companion book that John Ford wrote, How Much for Just the Planet?
How Much for Just the Planet is not a book I've read. I've read a bit of How Much for Just the Planet. I think the little bits I've read are great, just to make you understand that not everyone views the world the same.
Say more about that, John.
Well, I've only read the first chapter, but like the bits about because there's things going wrong with the Enterprise, with this Klingon ship, and with this civilian ship, and what's wrong with
the Jefferson?
The Jefferson.
I think it's the Jefferson, right? And there's this bit with the peppermint milkshake, which is just absolutely unreal. But go ahead.
But it's great because it's all the different gags and all the little things. I mean, the best joke I got in it so far, I need to go back and finish reading. I don't have a physical copy. I was flicking through a friend's. Is the Klingon commander grumbling about the fact that the Organians interpreted the heads on the Klingon ship as a weapon and had immobilized the Klingon toilet seats by heating them to a high temperature while somebody was sitting on them. Which is, it's one
I've forgotten that bit.
Yeah, as a historian, it's one of these, that's so dumb it could only have actually happened moments, even though it's fiction. It's like, that's ridiculous. But that's the sort of like dumb thing people would actually think if they have no idea what a weapon is. The crapper might just look like a weapon if it's firing a projectile at speed.
So the thing I love about both those books together is they're written by the same author.
Completely different in tone.
And and it is true that there are, like, you see the way he uses the Klingon names and the Klingon ranks. I mean, he's being very consistent with the history of Klingon culture. All that is in that other book. But that book's a full-on screwball comedy. And the final reflection is this very serious, ponderous book. Yeah,
it's just it's quite silly.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, he's basically also, I've just remembered it, he's just basically trying to do a bit of a Shimagadoon moment, isn't he, as well?
Yeah, I mean, the plot of it, for those who haven't read it, is essentially that because of the Organian Peace Treaty, there were some rules that were put into place, and a planet that is in the neutral zone is discovered to have a lot of dilithium on it, and it turns out that this planet was settled by basically a bunch of theater kids from Earth. And so under the rules of the Organian Treaty, the Klingons and the Federation have to present their case to this bunch of theater nerds as to why they should be allowed to develop the planet, and they have to follow whatever rules these crazy theater kids set up. And that's sort of the premise of the story. And it's nuts.
Yeah, and I really need to finish it, because if it's a John Ford book, it will just be one of these absolute insane books that also follows all of its rules.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, okay, let's talk about Errand of Mercy. You made reference to this one before, the TOS episode, of course, where we're introduced to the Klingons. It's an earlier season 1 episode in TOS. And of course, this is the one with the Organians and all of that. So tell me what's going on with Errand of Mercy. Why is this episode interesting to you?
Well, Errand of Mercy is interesting to me simply because I've just spent ages and ages poring over it to try and figure out what the dynamic is there. But it's also fascinating that this is a groundbreaking episode for Star Trek, and it's also has some really fluffed moments. There's some really bad stuff in there. Like, in the opening sequence, they just don't film the set properly, so you can see Spock standing off of the bridge. Like, his foot's off the actual soundstage. It's insane. And then, but it's still really good. John Concagh is just phenomenal. He chews scenery, but he chews it in a way that's like, you do this, you chew it like it's haute cuisine, John. I just don't think the Klingons would be the Klingons, and they wouldn't have stuck around as characters and as enigmatic villains if Concagh hadn't given them that moustache-twirling, monocle-wearing, goose-stepping, we are not barbarians villain energy. He's just brilliant. But it also, what fascinates me about Errand of Mercy is it's the first time that the Federation has explicitly stated, it's the first and only time the Federation is explicitly referred to as a democracy. Because we have a president, but the president never says that he's voted for by the people. And we're told that Federation members must have democratic principles and this and that, but there's nothing to say that the government of the Federation is overall pro-democratic, just that apart from that.
I seem to recall, and this could easily be misremembering, but I seem to recall something somewhere, this could be from a totally non-canonical source, God help me, that the Federation president was selected from among the council members.
The home front implies that Jarashidya mentions being nominated by the councillors, right?
Ah, right, okay.
And of course, this is interpreted several ways. I mean, in Edge of Midnight, I interpret it that you have to get enough nominations from the councillors to run for president. But that's you still have to win a vote in an open election. But some people have interpreted it as it's like the UN Secretary General. It's your mileage may vary. I know that Keith Candido, who wrote Articles of the Federation, interprets it in the you get nominated and you run in an election. Mainly because it's what people recognise.
Right.
Though realistically, what a general election of the Federation looks like in the 23rd century is probably closer to voting for president in 1800s than anything we'd recognise.
Okay.
Well, simply, communication is fast, the galaxy's big. You know, if you look at Balance of Terror and how it interprets time distances and communication distances, the Federation does not have instant media contact across the whole expanse of it.
At least at that time. Later on, we see they do.
Yeah, and I think that's bad. I think instantaneous communication should be used sparingly. I think it makes it more interesting for plots. But, you know, you go with what you want. And I think Errand of Mercy is also this interesting time capsule of where America is in the 60s. You know, it's coming off the back of the Cuban Missile Crisis. But also it's a generation disposed from Second World War. The arguments for war that Kirk gives and the justifications they give for the battle to Organians are, you know, justifications that people like Jeffries and Roddenberry, everyone of a certain generation would have heard. I mean, Matt Jeffries flew bombers over Europe. He would have understood the justifications for why one would bomb innocents. He would have heard them. They'd have all have heard them. And they'd have had to live with it afterwards.
Right.
And Errand of Mercy, the Organian intervention is both a cop-out and not. You know, it's a cop-out in the sense, they fix everything. But in long terms, the purpose of the Organian intervention is to make Kirk, as our hero, as our pacifist hero, turn around and realise what he's done to himself. And that's so fascinating as this moment of making him look in the mirror and think about what he was willing to do. So yeah, I love Errand of Mercy.
Let's talk about a Deep Space Nine episode. Let's talk about the season 1 episode Duet. So, of course, this is the one where Major Kira discovers what she thinks is a Cardassian war criminal. And they have a wonderful set of scenes together. Certainly an interesting episode, has some great acting moments and a fantastic guest star. But I want to know from you, John, what is this episode about for you?
Duet, beyond being a fabulous debate around war crimes and genocide and who takes the blame, Duet speaks to what Star Trek is really good at, which is that Star Trek is about morality and about your own morality, but also about you and what you are. The best bit of Duet is that climax where the Cardassian breaks his facade, and you realize he's been doing this because he can't sleep at night. He needs somebody to face the music for what's happened. And it's beautiful. And the script would work if there were only 3 actors and it was being done on a stage in some back theatre somewhere, because it's just tight and no lines wasted. But even then, if it wasn't for Nana Vista and I've forgotten the name of the guest star, it simply wouldn't be as well remembered. It's just fantastic. And it's just that moment at the end when he dies, and it's like he just dies because he was Cardassian, not for anything he did or didn't do, just because somebody wanted to take out their anger. And it speaks to what good Trek is, which is a mirror on what we want the world to be like.
Harris Yulin is the actor's name, by the way.
It's fantastic, absolutely sensational work. It's just... I just don't think... It's one of these moments where so much of early DS9 is hit and miss, and you realise that it's just willing to do something the earlier series wouldn't have. TNG wouldn't have killed him at the end of that episode. TNG would have let him live, I think. And it would have undercut the point. It would have been a good episode, but it would have undercut that climax, I think. But also, it wouldn't have worked in TNG, because TNG wouldn't have been willing to build up what the Cardassians had done to the Bajorans every episode beforehand. Even the, 15 episodes beforehand, we learned so much about what Cardassian occupation meant.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're confronted with somebody who may have instigated it. And it gives it so much more punch than it would have been if this was some Planet of the Week.
Right.
I think it's one of Nana Vista's best episodes. Which is great.
Let's talk about a TNG episode. Let's talk about Encounter at Farpoint. Now, I'm excited to talk about this one because it very rarely comes up. But it's something that is on the list, and the M5 says we have to talk about it. So what is it about the TNG premiere that is interesting to you?
Well, I have a strong connection with Encounter at Farpoint because for about 3 years, it was probably the episode of Star Trek I watched the most because it was downloaded onto an iPod Touch I had when I was a kid. So I just could, if you went on holiday, it was there on the plane. And on one holiday flight, I think I watched it 3 times in a row just to pass the time. Just bam, bam, bam.
Goodness gracious.
6-hour flight gone. But I love the music. I love the vibe. I love the look of everything. You're not the biggest TNG fan in the world, but I love early TNG. You do not get more early mid-80s camp nonsense vibes than the arrival of Q and the trial. And, Picard's, if we're damned, let's be damned for who we really are. I think it's a fantastic episode. I think it's one of these episodes that actually got better for me after Picard, just because it's the start. It's the start of this journey, and it's the start of who all these people are.
Mm-hmm.
And, you can see where the rewrites kind of screwed with it. I think, the biggest thing that upsets me is that the sequence in the holodeck isn't when we first meet Data. Because imagine if the first we met Data was with Riker walking through that glade and across that river and hearing Data try to whistle and then going... If that had been the first time we met Data, it would have been sensational. It wasn't, but it doesn't make that much difference because that sequence is just brilliant.
Is it Is it your favorite premiere?
Can't be Emissary. I think Emissary is the better written one, but Encounter Farpoint has more personal meaning to me.
Okay.
Just as this episode that kept me hooked in Star Trek for a long time, because it's just, the music's really good, the characterization's really good. It really it really establishes that Trek is back in a way that Emissary establishes that Trek is different.
Oh, it's an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah. But I'm just a massive fan of the Ron Jones score. I think Ron Jones is a thoroughly underrated part of the Star Trek story, and I will never forgive Rick Berman for firing him. Specifically, I will never forgive Rick Berman for firing Ron Jones before he wrote a Cardassian music theme.
Okay, is that something you were wishing we had gotten?
Well, think about how iconic Ron Jones's reinterpretation of the Klingon theme is, and then how important he created a Romulan theme, a new one, and how that sticks with the Romulan. When you think of the TNG Romulans, you can hear that sort of cascading scale in your head. It's the one for the neutral zone or the defector, and that adds so much character. My mother is a musician. I've got a great affinity for music and music theory, and I think the music of Star Trek is a thoroughly underrated and important part of the storytelling. And one of the reasons also that I struggle with Voyager, because it doesn't really have any big music moments in a way that even DS9 had some. But yeah, Encounter Farpoint has some spectacular musical themes as well, and sequences. And you know what? I like the Sorcery separation sequence, the really long one where Riker puts it back together. I think it's a great moment of characterization.
Okay.
Because it's Picard. It's like it tells you Picard wants to see how he can do, and it tells you that Riker is confident in who he is. It's great. I love it. It's
I love it when shows put those things in there like that.
Yeah, I understand why people don't like season 1 of TNG, but it's just got a close place in my heart for being so dedicated to that sort of like phase 2. We're back. We're doing the same thing. Campiness. They're in spandex. Picard's an asshole. He's a massive asshole, and that's really interesting. I think Picard, as a professional officer who is deeply uninterested in other people's lives but has to be forced to open up to it, is more interesting than Picard as the grand old man.
Right.
Like, we kind of get this towards the end of TNG, and especially in the films, and Picard is sort of like kindly grand old man who everyone loves, whereas to Picard, who just wants to be left alone to be the great explorer, is just more interesting.
Yeah, I see. That was a premise that spoke to you. I get it. I mean, I had a similar thing in Discovery Season 1. I was very interested in what was going on with Lorca, why he was the way he was, what particularly broke this guy. And once we got the Mirror Universe reveal, I was not interested at all anymore in the character or really what happened as far as the Mirror Universe stuff, because I don't really care about that. So that took the wind out of the sails for me as far as Discovery Season 1. But I get it. There's these ideas that they put in the show, these characterizations, and you want to see where they go with that. And then they do something different. You're like, I'm out.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Star Trek 3. Now, Star Trek 3 does not get a lot of love, John. So why is it on the list? What is it about this particular movie that draws you into it?
Star Trek 2 and 4 would not be as good films. Star Trek 4 wouldn't exist, but Star Trek 2, I think, if you're going to follow that up, there's no better way you can do it than Star Trek 3. I think they are unbelievably complementary films. Like, I don't understand how you could watch 4 without watching 3. You should have to go 2, 3. You must go 2, 3, 4. Simply because there's an arc to them. And I think to put it in order, number 1, the show finishes the arc for Kirk of what's more important, duty or friendship / love, depending. Your mileage may vary on the Spurk issue, but duty or devotion, what's more important to him? 2, James Horner knocks it out the park again with a score. Mm-hmm. The stealing the Enterprise sequence, beautiful. 3, the first time we see Earth properly. We see Space Dock. We see sequences on Earth. We meet Commander Starfleet. We also have to deal with the consequences of Star Trek 2 properly. But I think it really comes down to this fact that it's the 3 moments in that film that always stick with me are 1, When Harry Morrow tells Kirk he's not going to allow to go Genesis, it's like, you'll lose your career for it. And then Kirk just goes, we're doing it anyway. Well, the word is no, but we're doing it anyway. 2, you Klingon bastards, you killed my son. Because it's just, I think that might be Shatner's best sequence in the film. It might be one of his best overall.
I think that he's actually said that.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. It's my take on William Shatner has always been that William Shatner is as good as a director who can get it out of him. And Nick Meyer and Leonard Nimoy could get it out of him. I think Robert Wise could to an extent. I think some of the early Kirk, Robert Wise is very good at getting, and Shatner really good in the motion picture at making Kirk feel different before and after Spock is back.
Yeah.
But I think Nicholas Meyer and, well, you must have heard, the listeners heard the Nicholas Meyer anecdote about how he got the sequence when they bring the Alliance shields down, which is that he made Shatner do it over and over and over again until he stopped being grand about it. He stopped being cute. Yeah. And what's fascinating about that, you Klingon bastard, you killed my son, is it goes straight through him. It is the most vulnerable moment we have seen Kirk in since City on the Edge of Forever, basically. And it's great. I didn't watch it for years and years because I was just told it was a bad film. Then I watched it, I was like, this is a really good character exploration of who... It's a complicated character explanation of how Wrath of Khan is about how Kirk can't accept defeat. Search for Spock is about what Kirk actually accepting sacrifice and accepting that everything he's built, that the Enterprise, which is the encapsulation of everything he's done for himself for the last 20 years, 30 years, he's willing to literally blow it all up for one man.
Yeah, and he loses the Enterprise and his son that he just found out that he had in the previous movie, all in the 5-minute span.
And it's, it's sort of, there's a sense in which one is like, oh, did you have to lose David so quickly? David's such a great character, great concept. But the film would not have as much impact without it. The tragedy of the film, the tragedy of what Kirk is willing to sacrifice would not land without losing David Marcus so quickly.
If you've ever read the novelization, one of the things that I think would please you is that a lot of John Ford's Klingon world building goes directly into the novelization.
Because the novelization still includes this thing about the bird of prey being a stolen Romulan vessel, doesn't it?
Well, I don't remember that part particularly, but the Vonda McIntyre who wrote it followed the naming conventions. And a lot of the Klingon sort of world building lore as far as how they act on the ship, like that, there's a through line directly from Final Reflection into that novelization. And it was very clear that Vonda McIntyre had read it.
It's fascinating how they don't really override Final Reflection to Ron Moore, which I'll never forgive him for. I've decided on the spot, I'm never forgiving you for that, Ron Moore.
I'm sure he's listening. Let's talk about an episode you'd mentioned tangentially. You've talked about the Defector with the wonderful James Sloyan as the Romulan. So why is this one on the list? It came up in sort of an ancillary way, so I just want to put the question to you. What about this episode is special?
Well, the Defector is... There's this whole thing about how Star Trek is great at doing other genres really well. And The Defector could be a Tom Clancy novel. It could be, he could be a Soviet admiral. It could be a John le Carré novel. It could be set anywhere from 1700 to 2367. But it works so well because Picard is carried by, what's his name played? Jarrod, is carried by Patrick Stewart, but also every single element slots together. The moment, and it does thematically tight, having Data do Henry V at the beginning, have Picard be going through the whole thing, quoting it, having that moment where they get to Nirvana 3 and there's nothing there. And Picard has this moment of going, did you lead us here? And he's watching Jarrod and he goes, no, they tricked us, they caught us. And then Tomalok, Andreas Katulas, the lost real villain, the lost nemesis of TNG, God, if only they hadn't done Babylon 5 and they just given Catullus a proper role in that show. Because his Tomahawk is fantastic. He's one of the few reoccurring villains outside of Q who feels that they can match the main character in TNG.
Mm-hmm.
So much so that you wonder if the sort of match they go for with Ducat and Cisco has to come from what they were thinking about with Tomahawk, because he's great. He feels Romulan. He feels vicious. He feels like he would inspire deep levels of loyalty from his crew.
Yeah, I agree with you. One of the things I always think about when I see Tomahawk is how much that Andreas was able to do with so little. I mean, he didn't get all those many lines, and he was such a presence in the show.
Like the delivery of "I will haul your ship back to Romulus and put it in the square as a monument to your hubris" is like, and realizing that was him as Jakar was like, oh, this is what they could have gotten from you.
Yeah. I always say it's a little bit like buying a Ferrari and then driving it in first gear around the parking lot, right? It's it's great, but you could be having a whole different experience if you wanted it.
I wish they'd gotten him into the unification episodes.
Oh my God, that would have been wild. Absolutely wild. Now, one thing I always love, John, is when people pick things which are a little bit unusual.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a comic selection, Star Trek Crew, which is an IDW series from around 2009. And this particular series covers sort of the pre-commissioning, pre-launch of the original 1701 when it didn't even have a name. It wasn't even the Enterprise yet. It was the NX-0002. And we follow some of our characters. So tell me what's going on here with this one.
So Star Trek Crew is this anthology series that covers basically the career of number one, mainly, from the moment from her first cadet cruise on the prototype Enterprise, all the way through to when she becomes Pike's XO, and it's sort of a prequel to the Star Trek Early Voyages comics.
Mm-hmm.
And I love it because it's a massive inspiration for the background of Edge of Midnight and imagining what the world is like before the Klingon Wars. And two, it does so much with absolutely nothing. You have one character, number one, and we know tangentially that she knew Pike before she was XO, and they have this long-standing professional relationship. We know that Bob April was skipper of Enterprise and that his wife was the Doctor. And it does so much. We find out... But there's other things, like... we meet Admiral Dunson. I think it's him. We meet the Admiral who saved the ship. We meet our first Klingon surgically altered spy who tries to steal the Enterprise. On her first... There's a story in the anthology where the old Rusty Bucket ship that number one is on, is sent to a colony that's been attacked by mysterious aliens, and they have to fight to save the remainder of the ship, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you only see the attacker once, and you spend this whole thing looking. You see this one shot of the attacker. It's a Ferengi Marauder, and it's just you flip the page and go, oh, that's so good. It's like a TOS shadowy grey, but it's clearly a Ferengi Marauder. You're like, that is brilliant. And then there's another one where there's a planet. They end up on a planet. Did and it links through. So Assignment Earth, the Gary 7 episode.
Yeah, of course.
Backdoor Pilot Never Happened.
Terry Garr and all that.
So they wrote a comic book series based on the scripts called Assignment Earth. And one of the plots is that to win the Vietnam War, Dick Nixon authorized the creation of a super soldier clone race. And Gary 7 and what's her name? I forgot her name. Anyway, they stop it, and Gary 7's computer just beams them into a planet in the arse of nowhere. And then, in another comic book series from the same era, called Dr. McCoy Frontier Doctor, which is great, I recommend people read that too, Dr. McCoy accidentally ends up on this planet 300 years later, where these super soldier clones are fighting a proxy war as entertainment for the Klingons. Like the Klingons are just making these people fight each other to create entertainment. But then Crew has number one and Pike as junior officers on Enterprise end up there 20 years before that. And it's just these links across to be like, this is a lived-in world, but also to imagine what does the technology look like? What do the people look like? How do they feel about who they were? Building off of so many little kernels from so many different things. It's inspiring as a writer.
Yeah.
And it speaks to how the comic books are really, really important and, sometimes ridiculous, but really good parts of the Trek world. And also the art's really great.
Oh, it's fantastic. Absolutely. All right, well, let's talk about another TOS episode. Let's talk about the Doomsday Machine. And this, of course, is the one where we have the giant cigar-shaped instrument of doom destroying starships, including mostly the USS Constellation. And we have the wonderful William Wyndham as Commodore Decker. So what's going on here in this one for you, John?
Doomsday Machine is a personal one because my father has always pretended not to be a Trekkie in a way that one does if you're like, oh, I don't like Star Trek that much. But if I have a television on in a public part of the house and a Doomsday Machine is on, he'll sit down and watch the whole thing. So that's why, and it's just, and everyone who's watched Doomsday Machine knows exactly why, because it is one of the best 45 minutes of television Trek has ever created.
Yeah, that's a bold statement.
I think, there were better moments in episodes. And Trouble and Tribbles has some some funnier moments. City's Edge of Forever has some more dramatic moments. You get what I'm saying? Whereas, as a single block of television, I think Doomsday Machine is perfect. I think the tension ramps up from the beginning and never goes. There's that moment where Kirk, it's one of these moments where Kirk, they see the constellation and they're looking at it and Kirk just goes, she's been attacked. And it just kicks into action. We cut straight to the title. We cut to the titles immediately. And the episode never lets the pace up from there. They beam over. The place is derelict. They might meet Matt Decker. He delivers that speech about what he's seen. And you have this dual tension of, he's in charge of the Enterprise. Is he going to get them killed? Can Kirk get Constellation going? How are they going to deal with Decker? What's going to happen? It's just keeps going, and it keeps ratcheting it up right to the end. And it's that the finale. And once again, it's sold by the music. It would not be as memorable an episode without the music. I mean, I honestly suspect I can hear it in my head now. I suspect you can. I suspect all the listeners can hear it. Da 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 da. Yep. It's so, and they reuse it in other episodes like Immunity Syndrome, but you immediately think of Constellation going into the Doomsday Machine, and
it's iconic. Yeah,
and I chose it because it's just, honestly, once again, you can knock Star Trek. You can say it doesn't handle its issues of social issues of not aged well because society's moved on and that's good. You can say some of its writing's cack-handed, which it is. You can say sometimes William Shatner can't act for shit, which sometimes he can't. But then there's a Doomsday Machine where, it's got tight acting, good scripts. You have a monologue about doomsday weapons and why they're dangerous. Everything works in it. And, a while ago I wrote an article about how Tin Man is the platonic ideal of a Next Generation episode, which I think Tin Man is. I didn't put it on here because I hadn't written the article yet when I sent it. Well, actually, I had written the article. I just hadn't.
It's okay.
I'm sure you'll forgive me, but I think Doomsday Machine is the platonic ideal of an original series episode and Trek overall, in that you can tell this otherworldly, extraordinary story instead of it grounded in real world issues around danger and deterrence and what people are willing to do and what they're not to look after them. The argument between Decker and Spock about the Rigel colonies is great because it's tangible and it's also just really tight and perfect world building. We don't get told where the Rigel colonies are and who lives there. They don't bring up a star map and show us we're here, the Rigel colonies are there.
Right.
8.4 billion people live there. It's just like, what's this course? It's for the Rigel colonies. That's the most populous part of the Federation. It's great. It's just bam, bam, bam. You get delivered the information you need to set the stakes.
Got it.
Oh, God. I just remembered the look on Wyndham's face when he delivers the They're on the planet, not anymore.
Don't you think I know that?
Yeah, don't you think I know that? Yeah, it's just like so crushed. And it's, I mean, there was no way they could bring him back. I think any way to bring Decker back after that would have just burned it.
Yeah.
But Wyndham was so exceptional in that role.
There's just no way to do that and not harm the original in some way, I think. You just kind of got to leave it where it is.
It's a question of, I think if you bring... Well, in Edge of Midnight, one of my characters you follow is Matt Decker. And I write Matt Decker as, I call him the Lost Nelson. He would have been, if Decker had lived, he would have been a bigger name than Jim Kirk.
Oh, okay.
That's the thesis of Edge of Midnight. So if he hadn't, the reason he died is the reason he'd have been bigger than Jim Kirk, which is that he was willing to put his life on the line for things and put himself at risk. And trying to extrapolate who Decker is when he is in The Broken Man has been fascinating, and I do wonder if Strangely Wells will do it at some point. Before they announced that Paul Wesley was playing Kirk, I did think he was playing Decker. And I thought, I still think he should have been playing Decker. I still think having Matt Decker in Strangely Wells would be more interesting than Kirk. Because we know nothing about, we know he has a son.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a fan invention. I'm not sure that's...
It's in the Gene Roddenberry book.
Yeah, it's in the novelization, yeah, which, I don't know how people can determine if they want to accept that or not.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a sort of very nice, tragic duology that the father and son were both killed, saving the Federation from destruction.
And it also makes it a richer meal when Decker gets temporarily demoted, and he's like, "After you did all this to my dad, now you're screwing with me, bro? Really? That's how we're gonna go?"
But I think the dude's... I'm going to have to go rewatch it this evening. It's just so great. I just have an absolute... I adore it, I think, frankly. I just think it's one of these... It's a comfort episode.
So, John, putting out 100 episodes of a podcast is quite a time investment.
Yeah.
Doing the amount of writing that you've done on The Edge of Midnight is a monumental achievement. Just getting the words out, much less doing all the work you've done in corralling all these other creatives to help you with art and putting everything together and being able to deliver that in a format where people could read it and enjoy it. You have spent a preposterous amount of time on your Star Trek fandom. So I just want to put the question to you directly. Why does Star Trek matter to you?
I think it matters to me because it tells you the power of a good story. I think, there's so much said about Star Trek, about optimism and hope and the future and it inspiring, and this is all true, but I think the core of that is that Star Trek is about the power of telling a good story and what that can do and how that can change people and how that can change their relationship with the world. And you can argue the toss forever about what Gene's vision is.
Sure. And
I have no great belief in anything beyond Gene Roddenberry being a good salesman. But Gene Roddenberry was a good salesman because he knew the power of a good story and he wanted to tell good stories. He wanted to tell. You can say what you want about Gene Roddenberry's politics and his attitude towards various things and him having really dodgy views on things like the Yellow Peril and this and that and the whole absolutely bizarre relationship he has with sex. But he was a man who believed in telling good stories about a better future. And that is something that people attach to, and I attach to, telling stories about the world being better and living in stories where the world can be better. And people who share that belief, we live in dark times, but also we've always lived in dark times. Star Trek was conceived in the world after the Cuban Missile Crisis, in the world of the Vietnam War. It was the second season of Star Trek was written and broadcast in 1968, which is probably the most violent year of America's 20th century. It's the year of the MLK and the RFK assassination, and of
the Chicago Democratic Convention. Mm-hmm.
But it's only 2 years after it is Kent State and other things, but also it's a time of great optimism. It is the time of the moon landings and of the civil rights, the fruits of the Civil Rights Act beginning to be born, and of the future that was going to come kicking and screaming into action. And now we live in a world where people would like to roll it back. And I think Star Trek, to me, connects to a belief that we can keep being better and we can keep believing in our better selves. And I think that comes from good stories. I think people can believe too little in the power of a good story and the power of an inspiring story, even a simple one, even one with no depth. But even the knowledge that good can triumph over evil is enough for people to be hopeful. And I think that's really important. No, I think I'll end there. I think it's a good point to end.
Well, John, I've enjoyed our conversation. I hope you have as well.
I certainly have. It's been a delight.
Well, the M5 is signaling me that it is now time for the Kobayashi Maru.
Oh, no.
The Kobayashi Maru is a challenging and difficult test, cunningly prepared by the M5 just for you. Should you not only survive the test, but pass it as well, the M5 will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our little program. Are you ready, John?
I am.
M5, load the Kobayashi Maru simulation and prepare to record our guest responses.
Kobayashi Maru ready.
Pick the best TOS class vessel from this list. Ptolemy class, Saladin class, Hermes class.
Saladin.
What's for lunch? Fresh live gach, Gormagander kebabs, or Tribble cereal?
Tribble cereal.
The very next episode of Star Trek you watch will mostly be a mystery, an action-adventure, or a high-concept sci-fi.
Action-adventure.
Are we playing water polo with Archer, spring ball with Major Kira, or Parisi squares with Wesley?
Spring ball with Major Kira.
Best villain off of this list. Luther Sloan, superpowered Gary Mitchell, Captain Balthazar Edison, or Lord Garth.
Lord Garth of Isa, Victor of Axanar.
Simulation complete. M5, please compute the results and tell us if our guest has passed the Kobayashi Maru.
Analyzing.
John, I am pleased to tell you that the M5 has calculated that you have passed the Kobayashi Maru simulation. Congratulations, my friend.
Hooray.
And now, the M5, who has analyzed your answers, will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our podcast. M5, what title shall we award our guest?
John is awarded the title of Lecturer in Military History at Starfleet Academy.
So there you go.
Oh, that'll please Eric to no end. Thank you, M5. I appreciate the nomination.
John, please tell people how they can get in touch with you, where they can find all of your various podcasts, and where they can find The Edge of Midnight, and where they can follow you on the socials.
So you can find me, personally, at Bad Socialism on Twitter. It is mainly a conflab of history content and Star Trek content. And I hope, it's nuts and it's wild, and I'm quite sweary, but I hope you enjoy it. For Edge of Midnight, you can find me at EOM Project on Twitter. You can also, by Googling The Edge of Midnight Star Trek, you will find me. If you just put The Edge of Midnight, you'll get a Miley Cyrus song.
You'll get Stevie Nicks.
Stevie Nicks, which is better than Miley Cyrus than I get. But you put Edge of Midnight Star Trek into any search engine and you will find me. You can also listen to the audio version of the first book by putting The Edge of Midnight into your favourite podcast provider. You can find I Quit Star Trek by putting I Quit Star Trek into anything, and you will find it. You'll find it on Twitter and Blue Sky at Quit Star Trek Pod. And for the whole Tranquility Press fan non-fiction webbering, once again, Tranquility Press on Twitter or Google Tranquility Press. But yeah, the best place to talk to me, interact with me, is on Twitter. I love talking about Edge of Midnight. I really hope more people read it and enjoy it. It's a massive, terrifying 400,000 word, 200,000 odd word baby for the main thing. There's about 200,000 words of nonsense. Don't ask me around that, please, God. But yeah, there's a lot of places to find me. Some are more active than others. I would like people to come and say hello. But thank you so much, John, for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
John, thank you so much for being part of Trek Profiles.
It's been, I really enjoyed this.
Here ends this installment of Trek Profiles, and before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your wonderful greetings, your angry flames, or your own historical Federation fanfic, beautifully bound with a collector cover, to feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter or Blue Sky at Trek Profiles. Anything you send us may be used in the show, or it may be sent through the Guardian of Forever at a random time interval. This time, I leave you with a quote from the Trek novel The Final Reflection, when Klingon Officer Kren says after meeting young Spock, quote, "That one is worthy of the stars." Close quote. Thanks for listening, and live long and prosper.
This handcrafted podcast is brought to you by Stars and Sky Media Lab. It's cosmic.
My Twitter feed is going to be taken over with the Star Trek cruise at the end of next month. So that's going to be an insane amount of time and a week-long Bacchanalia/Star Trek party. So,
I mean, I'm not a big cruise person. If you put me on a boat, it needs a sail and some masts and some ropes. But I appreciate, it's sort of like, if I had to do a cruise, it'd probably be the Star Trek cruise, because it feels probably a bit like going to Vegas, but with more boat.
Yeah, well, it's not about the cruise part so much. It has a little bit different vibe in that, you know, at any convention that's a land-based regular convention, the talent is usually pretty controlled. They come out at a certain time, they do their thing, you know, and all of that. And the cruise is much more loosey-goosey with stuff. I mean, you know, I remember being at the disco at like 1 a.m. and looking over, and there's the Now Visitor dancing with my friend Rebecca. You know, Tawny was out there on the dance floor, you know, hanging with all the nerds, and everyone was cool. You know, everyone was cool, and it was just great.
It's one of these things, I guess, is having done some conference work and convention work and other stuff. Once you remove the mystery and you start acting like a normal person, all the big names tend to warm up, unless they're, you know, for lack of a better word, time tossers.
Yeah, like you're not going to see Shatner outside of anything he's contracted to do. Like he disappears and then...
I mean, he's 93. I certainly hope I don't see him outside of anything he's not contracted to do. He might just keel over. This is my general... I don't know if you see this whole, why is it Captain Kirk? Why have they shut him out? It's like, he's 93. He's on his fifth will. Jesus. Like, of course he's not on the front. Of course they're not holding him out. I saw him tangentially walk past me with AIDS at Vegas. I just thought, God, you're old.
He is.
Which,
I mean, you know.
He is, and there's nothing wrong with being old, but I'm like, why? It's like people being like, why is he so despondent about being asked to work on Star Trek? It's like, well, he's just facing his own mortality.
Yeah. I
don't even feel bad about him being upset about it. It's just him feeling old.
Well, I think even when he was younger, he was not doing anything he was contracted. He was not contracted to do. I mean, I don't think that's something new. But but
that also, fine. Man's gonna pay. The whole why aren't you being nice to the fans thing? Man has mortgages to pay and children to look after.
Yeah, a whole bunch of ex-wives.
Those horses don't pay for themselves.
Now, I will say this, just so you know, Olivia was a guest on this show.
Yes, which I reminded her today, and she went, I was? I went, yes. And she went, oh. And then she went, was I good?
She was very good, but she is on my whiteboard of people that I have a bone to pick with, mostly because she introduced me to the entire concept of this, like, werewolf fanfic mpreg sort of stuff that goes on. And
Olivia introduced you to the Omegaverse?
Oh, yes. And I was like, why are we talking about this? And there's like all this bonus content all about the Omegaverse and all that. And I was like, this is mentally scarring Olivia.
I just actually, do you mind if I just quietly tell the group chat about this?
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely.
What is Klingon trade? And if you've read the second book, you realise there's this long bit where I basically explained that the Klingon Empire produces a load of raw resources, and that's how they pay for all the nice stuff, because they don't have that industry. But the moment you cut them off of those markets, they're in trouble, and that cause grievances are legitimate. But there's also the illegitimate fact that part of the Klingon trade that's being cut off is slavery. Because, Kirk in that same episode talks about prison planets and this and that, and, you can interpret, and I do kind of interpret, that Kirk is liable to his own size propaganda. I don't think the Klingons are prison planets and slave worlds. But there's some grain of truth to it. I mean, simply because if Kirk is the good guy, there's got to be a grain of truth to it. Otherwise, what's the whole point of the whole thing?
Right on.
But it's that fascinating element also in that sense. You cut up the way Core talks about the Klingon Empire is so different to how they're presented from then on, which is such a great shame.
I'm reminded at this moment of a Babylon 5 episode, which is Confessions and Lamentations, which is the one where the Marcab race gets this disease.
Oh God,
right?
That is an episode that is just sensationally acted and written and put together, and really gets you just.
Yeah, and it does
at the end.
And one of the key things in that whole episode is that they had been showing the Marcab for years in the show. Like the episode would not have worked if it had been some species of the week that you had just ran across. And like they'd even featured the ambassador, like in the previous episode or 2 episodes before, he had a speaking part,
Yeah,
and
the Marcab were just one of the races you saw.
Yeah, they were there throughout the entire show. Right. And that earned that episode a level of drama that you just couldn't get if it was just some species of the week. Right. And I think the same thing is here.
And I think it's also earned by the fact that you've had episodes where Franklin has delivered miracles before.
Yeah.
Where they've been able to fix it, where they've been able to save everyone from disaster. And then you just have this moment where the doors open and Delenn and Lanier walk out, and you're just left looking at this room of bodies, and it's like, JMS has always been frank about what it was about. It was about the AIDS crisis. It was about how people react to how people did nothing.
Sure.
God, what an episode. I'm going to have to go back and rewatch that when I'm not.
Oh,
and probably
absolutely.
not on a dark Friday evening. I'll probably kill the mood for the rest of the weekend.
I don't blame you.
I will say this, which is Babylon 5 overall, I think, has some of the best episode titles ever. I think Babylon 5's first episode is called Midnight on the Firing Line, and it will never... That's just such a great name. And people know... I think Midnight on the Firing Line is a really good episode, because so much of that early season of Babylon 5 is so really spotty. But I watched Midnight on the Firing Line and I was immediately hooked. So
yeah. And of course, it's the same episode that's in The Coming of Shadows in season 2, just reversed, right? So the 2 episodes have the same plot, but it's like the characters are kind of swapped, right? There's a whole thing about buying a drink and then having the drink and then all of that. It's just A+.
yeah, and, oh God.
Anyway, that's another show. That's another podcast job. I don't know if you're a fan of, Hollywood lore or anything like that, but, Stanley Kubrick was known for having actors do infinite numbers of takes. I mean, just preposterous numbers.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And when he was doing Dr. Strangelove, George C. Scott had this rule, like this thing. He's like, I will not give you a over-the-top performance. I'm going to deliver it very straight. It's going to be a very serious performance. And he would have him do take after take after take after take after take. And then at the end, he would always like, why don't you just do one that's like crazy just for fun? And like, we'll show it at the cast party and it'll be for laughs. That's what all of those are what's in the movie. All of those are what's in the movie.
But that's why Jonathan's got so great in it.
All of those are that's actually the performance that he put in. And it was all just a matter of, spinning the wheels, getting the guy exhausted so that he would let his guard down, do the crazy take, and there you go. given your background, I had to include something about Lord Garth, in there. I knew you would appreciate that. Did you know? Did you remember the TOS class vessels from the technical manual? Those are all out of the book.
Perfect. Yeah, I love it. I do. The Saladin is my absolute favorite. They look so stupid, but I love them.
They do. Boom diggity, we're done. Was that okay for you?
That was perfect. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed that.
I always want to make sure my guest has a good experience on the show.
Oh no, this is great fun. It's I do a lot of interviewing for I Quit Star Trek, so it's nice to be on the other end of it for once.
But one of my favorite things, though, I will say this, is, we were talking about the FASA stuff, is I have the D7 deck plans, and I have the Enterprise deck plans from the FASA game, and I love those things. I mean, they are in bad shape. I can't display them. They're falling apart.
I've got a PDF of them somewhere.
Oh, they're just so fantastic. And I would just
but they've got fire control of them.
Oh, yeah, they got fire control. On the Klingon ship, they have indoctrination centers all around the ship to... keep the crew under control. I mean, it's glorious. Absolutely glorious. This is the original Star Trek blueprints. Like from the 70s.
Oh my God.
So it's here. I haven't opened it yet. And I'm going to try
the original Franz Josef.
In the pouch and all that stuff. That's in here.
Oh my God.
The reason I haven't opened it yet is because I want to make content out of it. I want to do like an unboxing, and record it.
You absolutely should.
So I haven't put that out yet.
Yeah, I think that's the thing as well. When I'm figuring out for Regiment, like what makes Constitution different, it's basically that Constitution's equipment, and Constitution's equipment and size. Basically is what allows it to do a 5-year mission. Is that 5-year mission isn't, you can do 5 years without ever going to base. It's you can do 5 years and nothing important will break down enough for you to have to call it off.
Yeah, you don't need an overhaul.
Yeah, no need for an overhaul, but also like basically anything bar and a cell coming off, you'll probably be able to make it back to a base.
Right on.
So like I can imagine they lose power, the ship can take a beating, but it will be fine, and that's what makes them really good. But it also is why they lose so many, because people take risks with them.
Yeah, and if you only got 12, you got to be careful.
And they're not. I mean, my take on why you lose so many so quickly at the end of the 2060s is they've worked the crews too hard.
Right on. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you look at Decker, Tracy... Well, Decker and Tracy specifically, they just simply work these guys too hard.